In this video, we're going to unravel the link between ADHD, trauma, and addiction. Now, I'm going to define all three in this video and I'll show you the link between all three of them. And I'll share your personal story. I used to be addicted to video games. I used to be addicted to junk. I used to be addicted to video games, bro. Deeply addicted, bro. I used to play this stuff 6 hours a day. And I used to squeeze pleasure from it. I'd give excuses to play them every day, all the time. And I'm coming from a place where I can relate to the stuff I'll teach in this video. And this is why you should listen to me. I promise that you'll understand the link between these three. And you will, once you understand the link between ADHD, trauma, and addiction, you will break free from your addiction of any sorts. First of all, what is an addiction? An addiction is a physiological and psychological process that manifests in any behavior someone finds relief in and therefore craves in the short term, but has negative consequences in the long term. And despite the negative consequences in the long term, they still continue to do this behavior. Now, notice how I said behavior. Any activity, bro. It can be talking to a toxic person. It can be watching TV. It can be playing video games. It can be taking drugs. Anything. It doesn't have to be drugs. It can be anything. I'll give you an example, practical example. You see this here? I hit my head with this and I enjoy it. I find relief in this. I crave this in the short term. But I suffer from brain damage. But despite me knowing that I have brain damage, I still continue doing this. That is an addiction. Now, let's talk about trauma. Trauma is not the event. You know how people say, oh, my parents hit me. I got shouted at. My teachers shouted at me. They hit me. Or I got beat outside. I got mugged. That event is traumatic. Trauma is what happens within you as a result of the traumatic event. Trauma is all to do with within you. It's one thing to recognize that you have childhood trauma, and it's another thing to tackle this trauma and heal it. Now, let's talk about ADHD. ADHD, by scientific definition, the ADHD, attention deficit hyper disorder. What is it in practical terms? In practical terms, it basically means you tuning out when you're meant to be focusing in the present moment. You tuning out, you zoning out. Your teacher is teaching you about simultaneous equations and you're thinking about something else. You zone out. That's ADHD. It's not genetic, it's not inherited, it's not a psychological problem. It's just you zoning out. Now, let me unravel all three. In this video, you shall tackle your addiction. And I promise that to you. ADHD is simply a defense mechanism. Picture this. You're a child. No, first, before we go there, what would you do if I said something rude to you? If I threatened to beat you? You couldn't shout back at me. You couldn't fight back at me. What would you do? You would simply choose to ignore me and focus on something else. Now, when you're a child and you experience some stress, you felt some stress, let's alone your parents hitting you or beating you or whatever, you felt stressed as a child. I'll explain why you will feel stressed. What would you do as a defense mechanism? You'd simply zone out. You'd zone out. Whenever there's a stressful situation in the environment, you would simply zone out. Now, here's why you would zone out. The baby is very open and can feel the pain in its immediate environment. It absorbs the pain of its caregiver, of its felt stress, of the caregiver's stress, and it mirrors that. And as a way of defending itself, it zones out. The opposite is true. When the environment is very tranquil and calm and peaceful and loving and happy, the baby absorbs that. Even if they don't understand words, they feel the affection. They are like a sponge absorbing that love, affection. And if the environment is rigid, painful, and if it's full of terror, the baby absorbs that. And as a way of defending itself, it zones out. Now, what happens when the baby zones out in these development years? Now the baby gets programmed because these are in the development years now. The baby gets programmed to simply zone out whenever there's stress. This helps the baby in the short term, but in the long term, it does not serve to be good. Here's why. Now the baby, obviously, through neuroplasticity is the brain's ability to change. The baby zones out whenever there's stress. This gets programmed in their brain, and when they're older, they can't focus in class. They don't know how to read. They can't read. They know how to read, but they can't read. They can't read because they read the first sentence and their mind is wandering. This is why ADHD is a defense mechanism. When this grown-up child zones out and they realize that they've been zoning out, their life becomes very boring. Okay, very, very boring. You zone out and you realize, oh, I was daydreaming. And your life becomes very boring. And so you depress. Okay, you depress these emotions. You try to ignore them, put them aside. What is depression? Depression is to push down. So you push down these emotions because they're painful to feel. It's very painful to realize that you've been in a lecture for an hour and none of it got stuck in your head. It's very painful. So you push it down, you depress it down. And even now, depression becomes a defense mechanism. Not defense, but it becomes a coping mechanism with your ADHD symptoms. Your ADHD-like body, your mind. You push your emotions down because they're painful to feel. Now what happens after? Let's go deeper. What happens after? When your life becomes boring, when you realize that you're zoning out all the time, this makes you prone to addiction because you feel this sense of incomplete feelings in life. You feel like your life is incomplete because almost all the time you're just zoning out. Okay. Now, there's ADHD arising from your childhood and your traumas and stuff. And there's also ADHD arising from you just scrolling on your device. You're scrolling, mouth breathing, you're scrolling on device, you're shortening your attention span. There's that type of ADHD. And there's this also deep ADHD that we are unraveling today that has a link between trauma and addiction. Like we said, this makes you more prone to addiction. Now, you must know, two fundamental needs of a human being are authenticity and attachment. Now, attachment is to develop connection with people and to feel the need to be looked after or to look after a human. Because when I have the motive of looking after you, I will do anything by all means for us to survive. It's a survival tactic because I'll be looking after you, therefore you survive. And I'll have the motive to look after you, therefore I will not do dumb stuff with my life during the primal days. I would have made sure you had food, I had food, so that I survived, so you survive. It's a non-negotiable human need. For you to survive, I have to make sure that you survive, and vice versa. You see how it interplays. The attachment system is facilitated by our inner opiate system, our endorphin system. Our endorphin system in the brain release these chemicals that facilitate attachment. Now, a study was done where they took rats and shut down the opiate system. It was shown that they had this disinclination to attach, and therefore they didn't survive. Because when I don't care about your survival, and when you don't care about my survival, we go about our own ways. There's a saber-toothed tiger there, and because you don't care about me, the saber-toothed tiger will end up eating me alive. You see how attachment is a non-negotiable human need. Now, let us talk about the next human need, which is authenticity. Authenticity is feeling what's inside, being connected with our gut feelings. It was essential for survival because when you look at it from a different lens, say the saber-toothed tiger was there, right there. It was there. Imagine a saber-toothed tiger there. And there's bushes covering. I would have felt the gut feeling that there's a saber-toothed tiger there. And if I based my planning, my thoughts on logic, rather than instinct and gut feelings, I wouldn't have survived. Because logically, there's nothing there. I can't see a saber-toothed tiger because it's being covered. But instinctively, I can feel that there's a saber-toothed tiger there. So when I feel it, I'd rather fight or flight as part of my sympathetic response on the nervous system. We talked about this in the first video. So that I'd rather fight back the saber-toothed tiger, or I'd rather run away as a result of my gut feelings, my authenticity. Authenticity and attachment are two non-negotiable human needs. Now, let's go deeper. This is very interesting. I hope you're following with me. What happens when authenticity threatens your attachment relationships? Let me give you a mind-blowing example. Imagine me as a child. Imagine you as a child. Say you were in the toy store, candy store, and you cried because you wanted this candy, you wanted this toy. You being a child, you wanted everything. And you cried, and your mom looks at you with this angry look. She looks very angry at you, and she says, "Good children don't cry." She shouts at you, she shows you these sullen expressions. What you pick up in your brain is that crying children don't get loved, because you have picked up on her unloving expressions. But she's your mother, and your survival depends on her looking after you. So what do? You have to be with her. So what do? You suppress your authenticity and act in accordance with what she deems as good children to get the love that you want. Instead of you being authentic to yourself, you end up being inauthentic to conform to her standards to get the love she wants. To get the love that you want from her. And now, is it a surprise now that when we grow older, we don't know who we are and we struggle to find ourselves and we don't know what we want in life? Why? Because we suppressed our authenticity as a way of coping with the fact that being authentic means that we won't get that unconditional love from our mum and dad. Understood? Now, so we talked about the trauma, which will lead to you disassociating in your day-to-day life. And this makes you less interested in your day-to-day life, which makes you prone to addiction because you want that fulfilling aspect. And you get that temporarily from addiction. You get that temporarily from all your addictive habits. Now, addiction is an attempt to solve the effects of childhood trauma. The effects of childhood trauma, what happens inside of you as a result of the traumatic experiences you experienced as a child. That scenario of you in a toy store, that was trauma because you saw the unloving expression on your mum or dad's face, and now it's stored deep inside of you and you won't forget that. You start to develop a negative view of the world. See the world as a place where you're not fitting in because you've lost your authenticity. And now addiction becomes an attempt to solve that problem. Temporarily, it does. Temporarily, it creates a short-term relief. Short-term relief, it creates that. But in the long term, it has these negative problems, which you will continue to do. Now, what is the call to action of this video? We talked about how trauma and ADHD and addiction, depression are all linked. Now we go to the root of the problem. We don't ask ourselves why the trauma, we don't ask ourselves why the addiction. You play video games, you're addicted to video games, you're addicted to vaping, you're addicted to whatever. Good. I'm not angry at you for that. You should not be angry at yourself either. You should be looking deeper. You should be looking at trauma. Now, you probably heard people say, "Oh yeah, I've healed, I've recovered from trauma." What does recover actually mean? To recover is to get something back. So when people say I've recovered from trauma, they've meant I have found myself again. What did they get back? They got back their self, their true self. They got back their true, authentic self. How do you do that? You go deep into who you really are. You peel back the layers of the onion and find this true person who you really are. This real, authentic, younger you that experienced the unloving expressions from your parents as a result of you being you. You recover yourself. You recover this person. You get back who you are. You develop a connection with who you are, and this real you becomes your new self, and you have healed your trauma. The essence of trauma is loss of self. You lose who you are. You recover that. by doing many practices, bro. For me, it was doing breath work, meditate. I'm not saying I'm healed from trauma, but I'm healing my trauma. Everyone has trauma, and there are many ways of healing it. Breath work, meditation. Some can even attest their healing of trauma to doing psychedelics, getting in nature, getting more in touch with who you really are. These wholesome stuff, gratitude, all of these will by all means will have a positive impact on how you get to recover yourself. Am I making sense here? I hope I'm making sense here. The addiction is not the problem. What is the problem is your childhood trauma, and the addiction is simply a mechanism, a coping mechanism to solve that trauma. I hope this video made sense, and I learned these insights from a physician called Gabor Mate, and he truly put this into perspective for me. And yeah, I hope this video was helpful. And if you have any addiction in life, just know that you're not the only person that is going through it, and it's possible to stop the addiction by simply going back to your childhood trauma. Over and out.